Good morning, my silky little gerbils, my immaculate jelly beans. Welcome back to Philosophy for the People. I want to share with you 10 philosophical questions that really get you to think, that can help you to improve your mentality, and that I want to hear your answer to. I'm not going to try to answer these questions, they're too tough, they are too deep, they are too profound, but they are just the sorts of questions that philosophers ask, that everybody should be asking and thinking deeply about because they bear significant consequences. They are questions that pertain to metaphysics, to philosophical anthropology, to political philosophy, you name it. I have 10 questions that I want to hear your answers to, important questions, and you can share your answers with me in the comments. These are not questions that are original to me. Probably they're not really original to really anybody because they're sort of perennial philosophical questions. However, I am borrowing this list of questions from Mortimer J. Adler, who we love and is somebody we relish in his thought often here at Philosophy for the People. And this comes from a Great Ideas newsletter of his. I'm going to read a little snippet of that because he has some cool things to say in general. Then we're going to go through these 10 questions, and I think you'll find them challenging and stimulating. Hey, before we do, let me say that on our new Philosophy for the People YouTube channel, we are this close to our first 1,000 subscribers. Now, that seems like nothing compared to my original YouTube channel, and I'm very grateful for all the people that follow there. But hey, your first 1,000 subscribers is a pretty big deal. So help push us past that threshold. If you haven't already, please, like, share, subscribe to this channel, leave a review, and tell people about it. Let grandma know what's happening over at Philosophy for the People. Tell grandma all the good stuff that we're doing, all the good conversations that we're having. Would really, really appreciate it. So let's talk about these 10 philosophical questions. Like I said, they're good questions. They provide challenge and stimulation. And let me have a sip of coffee and then we'll dive right in. And of course, if you have any questions or comments or you just want to jam towards the end, let me know in the comment section for those of you who are here on the live stream. And we will have fun. And okay, so like I said, this if you're watching and not just listening, take a peek at the screen because I have a little excerpt here from Mortimer J. Adler. And again, this comes from one of his Great Ideas newsletter. If you can get your hand on some of his old newsletters, they're really good. Just brief essays that he wrote throughout the years on many different topics. And this one comes from a letter, a newsletter. I think the title was called "Can Adults Think?" And he's trying to challenge us to continue thinking, even when we're adults. He's kind of pointing out the sad fact that a lot of people, they challenge themselves intellectually, through high school and into college, but then they sort of reach this intellectual plateau. Often is the case after college. They get into their career, they start working. And yeah, they sort of hit an intellectual plateau. And that's sad, says Adler. And he thinks philosophy can be the cure, that we should continue our philosophical pursuits throughout our entire life, and that old dogs can learn new tricks. Or if old dogs can't learn new tricks, that's not a big deal because humans aren't dogs and ideas aren't tricks. So it doesn't even apply to us, even if that cliche is true. So let me read the sort of preamble from Adler, and then we'll get right into those 10 questions. And I'm just gonna read the questions, maybe add a little embellishment, but then I want to hear your answers in the comments. And then maybe if you want, we can do a future episode where I'll actually try to answer the questions from my perspective. We'll see what you think about that. But mostly, I just want to get the questions out there and give you some mental exercise. Okay, so let me quote Adler now. This is how Adler leads up to these 10 questions. He says this: "The mind does not grow weaker just by aging, but by disuse. If, as a matter of fact, our minds did weaken with the years that land us in the prime of life, we could not do anything about it, however much we regretted that this was nature's way of doing things. But that isn't the case. The decline in our mental abilities is something of our own doing. It is something we can prevent, just as we can prevent flabby muscles by exercising them, or some ragged game of golf by practicing our strokes. So he's a good writer, very clear, has great illustrations, and he's making a point here. He says, hey, don't allow yourself to get mentally weak. The mind, like the muscle, follows a principle of use it or lose it. It will weaken, it will atrophy if we're not challenging ourselves intellectually. So in the same sense, you want your sort of, back muscles to grow, start doing pull-ups, start challenging yourself. If you want your mind to grow, if you want to improve your mentality, your critical thinking capacity, your ability to solve puzzles, prudence, all that, you have to start thinking hard about things. After all, that's how Alvin Plantinga defines philosophy. Philosophy is just thinking hard about things. He'll also tell you that philosophy is often best done slow. Okay, so now Adler is going to teach us about mental calisthenics. How do we get a mental workout? Just a few more statements from Adler, and then we'll get to these 10 important questions. So Adler says, the familiar mental tests, which are given to school children to measure their IQs, are a way of detecting the amounts of native intelligence which they are supposedly gifted at birth. There are other tests which measure the amount of educational accomplishment at various levels of schooling, and there are quizzes and books and on radio programs by which adults measure the stock of assorted information they have gathered from the passing show. But none of these tests measures the mental condition of adults, the state of the equipment with which a grown man or woman is supposed to be doing his daily thinking about the questions of the hour, about his life or his country's. The kind of test I am thinking of is one which would tell each of us what we have been doing with our mind since we left school or college, whether we have been using it actively, whether we have been improving the talents we were born with. I should like to propose a test by which adults can measure their IQs, and here by IQ, I mean the improvement quotient, not the intelligent quotient. The ability we have acquired, not the native ability with which we have started. The thing to be discovered is not whether an adult knows more or different facts from those he memorized since he graduated a school or college, but rather whether he can think better about any of the major problems of human life. We can certainly be sure of one thing. If he doesn't think differently about these problems, he can be thinking better. He should be thinking better. There is no improvement without change, though, of course, since change may be for better or worse, there can be change without improvement. Okay, so what's Adler saying here? What is he saying? He's saying, look, put aside, IQ tests and whether or not people have a sort of native intelligence. What we can at least also think about is, have we been able to I sort of refine and improve whatever native intelligence we have? What is our, not intelligence quotient, but what is our improvement quotient? How do we determine that? And Adler's, he's going to give us a criteria here, and that is at least thinking, do we think the same way now about the major problems and questions of human existence, the big philosophical questions? Do we think the same way about these now as we did in high school? That's essentially what Adler is saying. Would we answer these and think about these in the same way now as we did in high school? If so, Adler is saying that's probably a red flag. That means that we're probably failing our improvement quotient. We're not really thinking as well as we could. We've sort of let ourselves, our mental abilities atrophy. Just like somebody who stopped exercising after high school because they stopped playing sports and they became flabby and weak in their body. Adler's saying, look, if you still think about the things the same ways you did in high school or college, you've probably gotten flabby in your mind. That's what he's saying, right? I think that sounds reasonable. He also says, look, change doesn't necessarily mean improvement. Things can change and because they're degrading, but change might be a sign of improvement. So change is a potential indicator for improvement. Okay, one more paragraph, then we're going to get to the questions. And of course, if you have any questions or comments of your own, we can take those towards the end. Colin says, an immaculate jelly bean is checking in here. Great to see you, Colin. Glad you guys like the pet names. Okay, Adler finishes with this. The first part of the test, therefore, is a way of finding out whether you have changed your mind. It invites you to consider some basic questions and to see, in answering them, whether you give the same answer that you would have given 10 or 20 years ago, shall we say, at the moment of graduation from high school or college. Then compare your answers now with those that you would have remember having given before, that you probably think you would have given before. Are they different or are they the same? If they're the same, are they at the same depth of understanding? Or has your mind changed in the sense that what you know now is just, yeah, it's more substantial than before? If they're different, can you give reasons for their being different, right? If you can't, you may have only changed your prejudices, and that would hardly be an improvement. Okay, let's clarify what Adler's saying. This is, I think, really profound. All right, so we're going to get into these questions, and he wants you to keep this in mind to see if you're passing his improvement quotient test. One, do you think about any of these questions differently now than you would have 10 or 20 years ago? And if you do think about them differently, why? Is it because of some principled reason? Is it because you thought differently about them? Or is it just because of, say, some social pressures or cultural changes? Have you actually changed your mind because you've thought deeply about these and sort of reached a different conclusion because you've, figured things out on a deeper level? Adler would say that's probably a good thing. Or have you simply just kind of gone with the culture or something like that, or just swapped prejudices rather than finding a deeper set of reasons? It's also important, I think, to highlight that I think you would still pass Adler's test here of improvement quotient, even if you hold the same conclusions now. So maybe you haven't changed your conclusion, but you can justify that conclusion. Now you've thought about the deeper reasons of why you actually believe what you do. So you haven't really changed your mind about what the conclusion is, but maybe you've changed your mind about how you think that conclusion is reached or how that conclusion is justified. And I will tell you, when we get to these questions, there's a number of these questions that I would just answer them very differently now than I would have in high school. Some of these questions, I would say I would probably answer them about the same in terms of of what the conclusion is, but I think about them very differently now than I do in high school, or the reasons I think they're true are different now than the reasons I would have given in high school. And in high school, I might not have been able to have given many reasons at all. But I think it's a case that we can sometimes just, sometimes we sort of know things intuitively, even if we haven't made it super explicit why we believe those things. But hopefully we, I think that's a lot of what philosophy does, right? Is if we follow a certain interpretation of Plato thinks we kind of know a lot of things intuitively. We kind of have it in our back pocket, and then we recollect it. Now, some people think of Plato's theory of recollection not necessarily as like pre-existing your soul and then remembering all these things that you forgot when you're incarnated, but rather having a sort of intuitive knowledge of something. And then a recollection is a sort of making explicit of it. That's a minority position of Plato's epistemology, but I think that's an interesting way of thinking about it. We have this sort of intuitive knowledge of certain positions or conclusions, maybe what justice is, but we can't really make it all explicit, right? We can't articulate all of it. So maybe that's one way of thinking about this. Maybe you wouldn't have changed your mind on a lot of the conclusions, but now you have deeper reasons, and you can better articulate or make explicit why you believe the things that you do. Okay, so that's enough preamble. That's what we're setting up for. These questions are not just meant to make you think deeply, but also to make you think about how much you've been sort of exercising your intellectual muscle throughout your life. Are you allowing yourself to become intellectually flabby, or are you trying to stay sharp? And a test for this is to ask yourself, honestly, how do I think about this now compared to how would I have thought about this 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or whatever? All right, so without any further ado, here are the 10 questions. Again, I'm not going to answer them. I want you to answer them. So in the comments after the video, give me your answers. And, you can give as much detail as you want. You can just say yes, no, or write what the answer is, or you can provide some justification. But I'm curious to hear where you're coming from on these 10 questions. So this is an exercise to the reader. And if you want me to try and answer these questions, maybe in a future episode, if you want Pat Flynn's take, you can let me know, and we'll talk about doing that maybe next week or something. But for now, I just want to get them out. So let's go. Here's the first question. Adler says, take the questions like the following, and don't forget that the important thing in answering each question is the why, and test yourself and perhaps your friends. So here's, maybe you're having some friends over for dinner tonight. You can just set these 10 questions out. Make for good conversation. In fact, I am having a friend over for dinner tonight. I'm having a priest over for dinner tonight. So chances are we might talk about some of these 10 questions. Question number 1 is this. Mark it down. Is freedom good? Is it good in itself, or only as a condition for getting other things? Is it the greatest good? That's a profound question. Is freedom good? Is it a good thing that we have freedom? And is freedom sort of an intrinsic good, or is it merely an instrumental good? That's what Adler is saying there. And if you do think it's a good, and if you do think it's probably an intrinsic good, what's the ordering? How high of a good do you think it is? Is it like the supreme good? Is it like the second best good or the fifth best good? So that's the first question. Is freedom good? Is it good in itself or just as a sort of means? And is it the greatest good? That's question number one. How would you answer that? Number two, deep metaphysical question. Does God exist? And did God create the world? So Adler's kind of cheating here because he's kind of putting more than one question in for each question, but that's fair. They're kind of bundled together. So number two is, does God exist? And did God create the world? So this is kind of a question of fundamentality. What do you think is sort of most basic metaphysically? Is it God? Is it something like God? How would God connect up in an explanatory or causal network to the rest of the world? How would you answer that? Do you think that thinking about the nature of explanation leads you to positing God or some entity like God? Or do you think that's superfluous or unhelpful or what? And what do you think is the sort of relation between God and the world? That's how I'm reading Adler's second question. Question number three, how does man differ from other animals? Does man have an immortal destiny? So again, kind of two distinct questions here. In what way does man differ from other animals? So you might think that we differ very little. Maybe we differ only in degree. Or maybe you think that we differ quite substantially. We differ in kind. How would you answer that? Does man differ from other animals? And if so, how? And then the other question concerning the nature of the human person is this life all there is? Or do we carry on after this existence? And if so, why do you think that? If not, why do you think that? Okay, that's number three. Number four is this. What is truth? And how do we know it when we see it? What a profound question. It's a biblical question too, isn't it? What is truth and how do we know it when we see it? Is anything either right or wrong for all people at all times? And if there is such a thing, how does one discover it? So Adler's kind of asking there not only what truth is and how do we know it when we see it, but is there any such thing as absolute truth that's sort of universal and binding over all people and times and places? Or is truth all relative, as some people might suggest, right? And if there are absolute truths that are sort of universal and binding over all people, times, and places, how would one discover that type of truth? So you're really getting your money's worth from Adler here, because there's really sort of a bundle of questions in each question, but they're all sort of related under certain categories. So this one's about truth. Think about that. These are good ones. I'm really excited to hear you guys' answers. Don't forget to comment after the video. And you can, of course, put in any questions or comments you have now. We'll see if we can spend a few minutes at the end just having some fun. All right, number 5 is this. Are pleasure and pain standards for judging whether a line of conduct should be pursued or avoided? Let me restate that. Are pleasure and pain standards for judging whether a line of conduct should be pursued or avoided? So whether you should do something or refrain from something, Adler is saying, should you base that decision on a standard of just pleasure and pain? Or should there be some other criteria or some different or additional criteria to help you make that judgment? Additionally, are there any other standards, right? So if is pleasure and pain the only standard? Is it a standard, or is it not a good standard at all? And if it's not a sufficient standard or the only standard, what might some other standards be for deciding whether to pursue a particular line of conduct? So what is Adler getting at here? Question 5. This would be a sort of ethical question. Okay. And are there any better standards of pleasure and pain? Or why are the other standards better than standards of pleasure and pain if you don't think pleasure and pain are the best standards for deciding whether to pursue a particular line of conduct? So you can see how Adler sort of his questions are, they fit into different philosophical categories, right? We have categories of truth and explanation. We have metaphysical categories. We have philosophical anthropology, and we have ethics. He's considering ethics. So as we know, philosophy is just, it's love of wisdom. It's thinking very deeply about things. Philosophy has many branches. We have logic, epistemology, knowledge, ethics, metaphysics, philosophical anthropology, philosophy of science, all that. So Adler's kind of, he's bouncing around here, which is great, right? We want to think about all these different areas are very important. So number 5 is sort of ethical considerations. Is pleasure and pain the end all be all, or should we be thinking of other criteria? Number 6, veering towards political philosophy, says this: is that government best which governs least? Is all good government self-government? Ooh, that's a good question, isn't it? Is the government which governs least the best form of government? And is all good government self-government? So you might think here is, so you might think is smaller government better? Is less intrusive government better? That's an important question, right? But also, what forms of government are better or worse, or what forms of government are legitimate and illegitimate? Is tyranny legitimate? Is it illegitimate? What about is democracy not only the best form of government, but is it the only acceptable form of government? What about monarchy, right? Do we think that that's a good form of government, or could it be, or is it an acceptable form of government? Is that morally legitimate? So yeah, number 6 is a question of political philosophy. And I'll be curious to see how you answer that. Number 7, always unfortunately pertinent in our sinful world, and that is war always wrong? And if it isn't, under what conditions is it right? Okay, is war always wrong? Is it always wrong? Adler wants to know. And if you think it isn't always wrong, then what could justify warfare? Is there a just war criteria, one might wonder? And if so, what would that criteria be? So again, 2 questions there, but they're obviously deeply related. That's number 7. Number 8, okay, says this: are all men created equal? Is every man created with a right to life, liberty, and a pursuit of happiness? And can he lose that right? Oh, wow. Profound question, right? So are humans of equal value, intrinsic worth, dignity, that sort of thing? If they are, then why? What would make that the case? Like what could possibly explain that we're all equal in such a profound sense? Deep question. Also, getting, I guess, closer to some of the core commitments of our great republic here in America, is every man created with these particular rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Do you think that's a right sort of classification? And do you think that they're self-evident? Some people say that those seem self-evident. Are they self-evident? What is self-evidence? What does it mean for something to be self-evident? It can't. Clearly, people disagree with that. Can people disagree with something that's self-evident? Sorry, I'm adding questions to the list, but they're important questions. And can you lose these rights? Are rights something that are just, can they be curtailed? That's an interesting question, right? Can rights ever legitimately be limited, or is that sort of just always illegitimate to suggest that rights could in any way be curtailed or limited? Yeah. Okay. Important question there, number 8. And that is both concerning, philosophical anthropology and ethics, I would say, moral theory. And of course, the different branches of philosophy are always sort of, overlapping and stuff like that. Hard to ever keep boundaries clear and distinct in philosophy, if not impossible, right? Metaphysical questions always bump up against epistemological questions, and ethical questions always bump up against metaphysical questions. And you're kind of always, this is why if you want to be a good philosopher, you have to be a good generalist. You have to have a, command of these different areas, like the hand gestures. Good. What do you guys think? You like these questions so far? All right, 2 more. Sorry, I should probably make this text a little bigger. I will post these questions in the comments below, so you can see them there as well. And also over at philosophyforthepeople.com. All right, number 9. Should all men work together on the same basis, or should they work some as masters and some as servants? Would you rather be a well-fed slave or a starving free man? Should there be any limit to the acquisition, possession, or transmission of private property? And if there should be, what limits should we set, and by whom? Let me read that whole question again. Should all men work together on the same basis, or should they work some as masters and some as servants? Would you rather be a well-fed slave or a starving free man? Should there be any limit to the acquisition, possession, or transmission of private property? And if there should be, what limits should we set, and by whom? Okay. A lot of different I think, aspects of philosophy going into, not just ethical philosophy, but political philosophy and even philosophy of economics and stuff like that. So number 9 is a very interesting bundle of questions as well. 10, last question. In what does human happiness consist, and how does it differ, if at all, from the happiness of other kinds of creatures? Wow, that's a really profound question. In what does human happiness consist, and how does it differ, if at all, from the happiness of other kinds of creatures? How does my happiness differ from the happiness of a catfish? Does it differ at all? Does my happiness consist in the same thing that a catfish's happiness consists in? Does it even make sense to talk about a happy catfish? Is happiness something that a catfish can possess? Does that make sense? Add the catfish one to that. Can a catfish be happy? Add that to number 10. There you have it, my friends. Those are your 10 philosophical questions that will get you thinking. And they're a bit of a test, says Adler, a test of your improvement quotient. And when you answer these in the comments, I would love to hear not just your answers, but give an overview. How do you think about these differently now, if at all, than you did 10 years ago? And just let me take a quick peek. I count, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5 of these questions I would just answer differently in terms of what I think the answer actually is than I would when I was in high school and college. Like my position has just changed. But I think I can fairly say that even on the questions where my position has not changed, my reasons have either changed or been more deeply thought out. And I think I can better express and articulate why I hold the positions I do now than back when I was in high school and college. I would love to hear your take on that too. So yeah, there's your exercise. We like exercise, right? We talk about physical exercise a lot on my other channel, and so we're talking about mental calisthenics, as Adler calls them here on Philosophy for the People. So let me finish with a few announcements, and then we will take a few comments and questions if you have any. First off, again, if you're not subscribed to our new Philosophy for the People channel on YouTube, please subscribe. Just look up Philosophy for the People on YouTube, smash that subscribe button, and tell Grandma about it. Let's say, hey, Grandma, there's this new YouTube channel. It's hosted by Pat Flynn and occasionally Dr. Jim Madden, and they talk about good things. I think you might be interested in them. And then you slide her the link. And got a lot of projects cooking up, a number of articles I'm just about to send off to various outlets and publications. I've got 2 books I'm working on. One is almost finished, my book on Aquinas with Gavin Kerr, that it's due out from Catholic Answers, I think, later this year. We're just about to submit our first draft of that, so that is coming along. Once I have an official release date, I will certainly let you know. And that will be a cool book because we're arguing that if you want to kind of understand Aquinas' 5 ways, you need to understand Aquinas' De Ente, and then De Ente should be a sort of a lens to help offer a unified interpretation of the 5 ways. So that's kind of the theme of that book. It'll be more introductory level, but we'll engage with, I think, some of the most relevant and best criticisms of Aquinas' thought. So I think it'll be helpful there. And I'm happy to announce I just got another book deal. I don't know how much I can or should. I guess I can probably say, yeah, I don't think there's any reason I can't announce more about this. The book will tentatively be called The Best Argument for God. And I think it's neat because I'm trying to reverse what I think is the best argument against God. And that will probably be out next January, assuming I get my manuscript for that submitted on time. So books are crushing projects. They demand a lot of me, so I would appreciate all the support you can give to this channel and everything else I'm doing. Obviously, if you want to say some prayers too, that's always super appreciated. I'm excited about these projects. I hope that they will be helpful and contribute in some meaningful way to the greater conversation. And lots of good stuff coming up on my different platforms as well. Philosophy for the People. We've got some cool new interviews cooking up. You should see those scheduled here on the channel, hopefully pretty soon, on a variety of different topics. I also am, in terms of our series, we'll be continuing our series on Aristotle with Jim here probably later this week. I want to, since we're on the theme of Mortimer Adler, I do want to continue our series on his 10 philosophical mistakes probably next week. And people have been requesting this. So get that book and read it, because it's not going to be one that I'll be able to read to you. It's too long. It's one that you should read, and then I'll try and help break it down and make it digestible, and we can offer some commentary and have some good discussion around that. Boy, yeah, just a lot going on. How you guys? Let's go to the comments. Let's see. Do you like these questions? Brendan says, question number 3 is a big one. What was question number 3 again? Oh, how does man differ from other animals? Does man have an immortal destiny? So I'll say, actually, since these questions come from Adler, Adler himself has a really great book on this. It's one of his more academic books. It's a bit thicker. Adler was great because he wrote on every level. He published in the journals. He wrote some pretty higher level academic books, and he wrote a lot of popular books. So for me, he's sort of a model of philosophy, because he's somebody who can write to different audiences, and he can even write to a general audience without, I think, diluting thought. Like even his popular level books are still really good, even for professional philosophers. But anyway, he's got a book on question number 3 called The Difference of Man and the Difference It Makes. Really good book. Actually changed a lot of my thinking on this question. Brendan says the self-evident question sounds like a cool one to get into. Yeah, there's a number of things that are claimed to be self-evident, yet there's tons of disagreement around them. So is that compatible, right? Can something be self-evident when you have smart people that disagree? In fact, I think it is. My answer to that one is, yeah, I think you can have something be self-evident even if smart people disagree. And a good discussion on this very topic can be found in Alexander Pruse's book on the Principle of Sufficient Reason, and he's got a section specifically on this because he wants to appeal to self-evidence in support of the principle of sufficient reason, but then he has to deal with smart people who disagree with that, right? So Pruse has a very good conversation on that. And I see Colin is answering some of these questions, but I'm going to close it here. I want you guys to answer the questions in the comments after the live stream, which will be by the time anybody else is hearing this or watching the video. So if you like it, let me know. Please tell me how you would answer these questions in the comments below, even if it's just a few of them. If you don't want to do all 10, I get it. Busy time. Take a stab at 1 or 2. Let me know your thoughts. We'll catch you guys on the next episode. Bye-bye.